Alexander Blackwood stood on the marble balcony of his Manhattan penthouse, surveying the city that sprawled beneath him like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. At 28, he was the sole heir to Blackwood Enterprises, a media empire worth over $8 billion. His life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of privilege board meetings he barely attended, charity galas where his presence alone was worth millions in donations, and a social calendar managed by 3 different assistants. Mr. Blackwood, his personal secretary Margaret, appeared at the French doors leading to the balcony. "Your grandfather wishes to see you in his study. He says it's urgent." Alexander sighed, straightening his Italian silk tie. Grandfather's urgent meetings usually involved lectures about responsibility, legacy, and the weight of the Blackwood name. At 83, Harrison Blackwood was still the iron fist behind their empire, despite officially retiring 5 years ago. The study was exactly as Alexander remembered, from childhood dark mahogany panels, leather-bound books that had never been read, and the lingering scent of expensive cigars. Harrison sat behind his massive desk, his steel-grey eyes as sharp as ever, despite his age. "Sit down, Alexander." The old man's voice carried the authority that had built an empire from nothing. "We need to talk about your future. If this is about the merger with Davidson Media, this is about your character." Harrison's words cut through Alexander's casual dismissal like a blade, or rather your complete lack of it. Alexander felt his jaw tighten. "Grandfather, I've done everything you've asked. I graduated from Wharton. I've learned the business. You've learned to coast on the Blackwood name. You've learned to charm investors and impress board members, but you haven't learned what it means to earn anything." Harrison opened a thick manila folder. "Do you know what this is?" Alexander glanced at the papers, financial records by the look of them. "Our quarterly reports? Reports on your spending, $50,000 on a single dinner party, $120,000 on a weekend in Monaco, $300,000 on a car you've driven exactly twice." Harrison's voice grew colder with each number. "You spend more on entertainment in a month than most families see in a lifetime." "I can afford it." "You can afford it because of money you didn't earn, building on a legacy you haven't contributed to." Harrison stood, his imposing frame still commanding despite his age. "Your father was weak, Alexander. He died young because he never learned the value of struggle, never understood that privilege without purpose is just elaborate suicide." The mention of his father dead from a drug overdose when Alexander was 12 hit like a physical blow. "Don't! I won't watch history repeat itself, which is why I'm implementing a condition to your inheritance." Alexander's blood ran cold. "What kind of condition?" Harrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You have 6 months to prove you can survive without the Blackwood name, fortune, or connections. 6 months to show me you're capable of building something meaningful with your own hands, your own mind, your own character." "That's insane. I can't just—" "You'll take a new identity, a modest apartment in Brooklyn, a job that pays minimum wage, no credit cards, no trust fund, no safety net, just you and whatever strength you can find within yourself." Alexander shot to his feet. "And if I refuse? Then you forfeit your inheritance entirely. Every penny goes to charity, and you can spend the rest of your life explaining to people why the Blackwood heir is working at Starbucks." "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Harrison handed him a set of keys and an address written on plain paper. "Your new life starts Monday. Your new name is Alex Parker. You have $500 in cash and a studio apartment in Brooklyn Heights. Everything else you'll have to earn." Alexander stared at the keys like they were a death sentence. 6 months? 6 months. If you can prove to me that you're capable of building a life based on merit rather than money, the inheritance is yours. If not, Harrison shrugged. Perhaps the Blackwood name deserves to die with me. The studio apartment was smaller than Alexander's walk-in closet. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's television. The refrigerator hummed with a sound that suggested it might die at any moment, and the view from his single window was of a brick wall exactly 3 feet away. He sat on the second-hand couch that came with the furnished apartment and stared at the want ads he'd circled in the local newspaper. Construction worker, retail associate, restaurant server, food delivery driver, jobs that had never existed in his vocabulary, let alone his consideration. His first interview was at a small bookstore in Dumbo called Chapter and Verse. The owner, a woman in her 40s with paint-stained fingers and knowing eyes, looked at his hastily assembled normal person outfit with barely concealed amusement. "So, Alex Parker," she said, glancing at his fabricated resume, "you're 28 and you've never had a steady job." Alex had prepared for this question. "I've been traveling, finding myself, but I'm ready to settle down now, contribute to something meaningful." "Uh-huh." The woman, whose name tag read Sophie, leaned back in her chair. "What's the last book you read?" "The Art of War," Alex said automatically, thinking of his business school curriculum. Sophie's eyebrows rose. Interesting choice for someone who's been finding himself. Most people on spiritual journeys tend toward more introspective literature. Heat rose in Alex's cheeks. He was already failing at being normal. "I enjoy strategy." "I can see that." Sophie was quiet for a moment, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Tell me, Alex Parker, why do you want to work in a bookstore?" The honest answer was that he needed any job that would hire him without a background check. But something about Sophie's direct gaze made him want to try for truth. "Because books are safe. They're reliable. And maybe because I want to learn what people actually read when they're not trying to impress anyone." For the first time, Sophie smiled. "That's the first genuine thing you've said since you walked in here. You're hired. $8 an hour, 25 hours a week. You start Monday." Alex's first day at Chapter and Verse was a humbling education in how little he actually knew about real work. Shelving books seemed simple until he discovered the intricate organizational system that Sophie had developed over 15 years of business. Customer service turned out to be far more complex than he'd imagined when he was the customer with unlimited funds. "You're trying too hard," Sophie told him after he'd spent 20 minutes helping an elderly man find a cookbook, only to discover they didn't carry the specific title he wanted. "Sometimes the best help you can give someone is honesty. We don't have that book, but I can order it, or I can recommend 3 others that might work even better." "I was trying to be helpful. You were trying to be perfect. There's a difference." Sophie handed him a stack of new releases to shelve. Perfect is performance. Helpful is human. It was Wednesday of his first week when she walked in. Alex was standing on a ladder, trying to reach a high shelf with a stack of poetry books, when he heard the bell above the door chime. He glanced down and felt his breath catch in his throat. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, artificial way of the women in his usual social circle. Her beauty was natural, unguarded dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, jeans that looked worn from actual wear rather than designer distressing, and a vintage band t-shirt that suggested she'd bought it at a concert rather than a boutique. She moved through the store with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. "Hey, Sophie," she called out, not noticing Alex on the ladder. "Did the new Murakami come in yet?" "Back corner, fiction section," Sophie replied from behind the register. "And Ella, meet our new employee. Alex Parker, this is Ella Martinez. She's here so often she practically works here anyway." Alex climbed down from the ladder, nearly dropping the poetry books in the process. When Ella turned to look at him, he found himself staring into the warmest brown eyes he'd ever seen. "Nice to meet you, Alex Parker," she said, offering her hand. "Welcome to the best bookstore in Brooklyn." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and Alex found himself completely tongue-tied for the first time in his adult life. "Thank you. Nice to meet you too. Ella laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "First day nerves?" "Something like that." "Well, if you survive Sophie's training program, you'll be fine. She once made me reorganize the entire poetry section because I put Maya Angelou next to Margaret Atwood." "Alphabetical order is sacred," Sophie called out from across the store. "Chaos is the enemy of commerce." "See what I mean?" Ella grinned at Alex. "I'll let you get back to your shelving, but if you need any recommendations for lunch places around here, I'm a local expert." As she walked toward the fiction section, Alex found himself watching the easy way she moved, the casual confidence that suggested she was completely comfortable in her own skin. It was a quality he'd never encountered before. In his world, everyone was performing, positioning, presenting a carefully curated version of themselves. "She's something, isn't she?" Sophie appeared beside him, following his gaze. "I wasn't, Relax, Alex. Attraction is human. Just don't be creepy about it." Sophie's voice carried a warning wrapped in kindness. "Ella's special. She's been through enough with men who thought they could buy their way into her life." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "Just that she values authenticity above everything else. She can spot a fake from 3 blocks away, and she doesn't give second chances." Sophie handed him another stack of books. "But if you're genuine, if you're really trying to be a better person, she might surprise you." Over the following weeks, Alex found himself looking forward to Ella's visits to the bookstore with an anticipation that surprised him. She came in 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes to buy books, sometimes just to chat with Sophie, sometimes to help other customers find exactly what they were looking for. He learned that she was a social worker specializing in family reunification, that she lived in a small apartment above a Greek restaurant, and that she had an uncanny ability to recommend the perfect book for any situation. She was intelligent, funny, and possessed a kind of inner strength that Alex found both intimidating and attractive. Their conversations started small discussions about books, recommendations for coffee shops, observations about the neighborhood, but gradually they deepened into something more substantial. "What did you do before this?" Ella asked one afternoon as they sorted through a donation of used books that someone had dropped off. Alex had prepared for this question, but looking into Ella's curious eyes, his rehearsed lie felt inadequate. "I worked in corporate consulting," he said, which was technically true if you considered inheriting a company a form of consulting. "But I got burned out. All the focus on profit, the way people became just numbers on spreadsheets. I needed to do something that felt more human." Ella nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand that. I started in corporate social work, trying to help companies develop better employee assistance programs. But the bureaucracy was suffocating. You'd write reports about families in crisis, and executives would debate the cost-benefit analysis of actually helping them. Is that why you switched to family reunification?" "Partly." Ella was quiet for a moment, carefully examining a water-damaged copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "But mostly because I know what it's like to have your family torn apart by circumstances beyond your control." Alex looked up from the box he was sorting. "What happened?" "My dad lost his job when I was 15. Construction work dried up, and he couldn't find anything else that paid enough to support us. My mom was working 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. We lost our house, ended up in a homeless shelter for 6 months. Ella's voice was matter-of-fact, but Alex could hear the old pain underneath. "The system tried to put me and my younger brother into foster care, said our parents couldn't provide adequate stability." "But you stayed together?" "Barely. A social worker named Mrs. Chen fought for us, convinced the court that separating us would cause more trauma than the temporary housing instability. She probably saved my family." Ella smiled. but her eyes were distant. That's when I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Alex felt something shift in his chest, a combination of admiration and shame that he couldn't quite name. Your parents, are they okay now? Dad found work eventually, good work. They have a little house in Queens now, and Mom only works one job. But it took years to rebuild, and the fear never really goes away. Once you've been that close to losing everything, you never take stability for granted again. Alex thought about his penthouse, his trust fund, his casual assumption that comfort was his birthright. That must have been terrifying. It was, but it also taught me what really matters. Family, community, people who show up for you when the world falls apart. Ella looked at him directly. Money can disappear overnight. Jobs can vanish, but the people who love you, who really see you, that's what keeps you alive. That evening, Alex sat in his small apartment, staring at the business card his grandfather had given him for emergencies. One phone call, and he could end this charade. He could go back to his penthouse, his comfortable life, his predictable future. But for the first time, he found himself questioning whether that life was actually what he wanted. The crisis came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Alex was working alone in the store, while Sophie attended a book fair in Manhattan, when Ella burst through the door, her face flushed with anger and tears. "Is Sophie here?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "She's at a conference. Ella, what's wrong?" Ella sank into the reading chair near the fiction section, running her hands through her hair. "I just lost a case. A family I've been working with for 8 months. 2 kids, 7 and 9 years old." Alex abandoned the inventory he'd been updating and sat on the arm of the adjacent chair. What happened? Their father lost his job 6 months ago. Good man, hard worker, just got caught in corporate downsizing. The family fell behind on rent, got evicted. They've been staying in their car for 3 weeks while I tried to find them housing assistance. That's not their fault. No, it's not, but the court doesn't care about fault. They care about stability, and a car isn't stable housing. Ella's voice cracked. The kids are going into foster care tomorrow. Probably separate homes because there aren't enough families willing to take siblings. Alex felt a surge of helpless anger. There has to be something. There was. Ella looked at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone her age. "I found a program that would have covered their security deposit and first month's rent, but it's funded by private donations, and their biggest donor just pulled out." "Who was the donor?" "Some media conglomerate, Blackwood Enterprises. Apparently they're realigning their charitable focus to more impactful initiatives." Ella's voice was bitter with defeat. $40,000 to them is probably what they spend on office coffee. But to families like the Rodriguezes, it's the difference between staying together and being torn apart. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. He knew about that decision. He'd been copied on the email last month. A routine budget reallocation, signed off on without a second thought. Names and numbers on a spreadsheet, exactly like Ella had described. "Ella!" "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't mean to dump this on you. It's just, sometimes the unfairness of it all hits me like a truck. These kids will spend years in therapy trying to understand why their family was destroyed because of money. Money that exists, money that could have helped, but went to something more strategic instead." Alex stood up abruptly. "I need to make a phone call." "Alex, you don't have to." "I'll be right back." He stepped outside the store, his hands shaking as he dialed the number on his grandfather's emergency card. "Alexander." Harrison's voice was sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" "I need you to restore funding to a housing assistance program. Immediately." "What are you talking about?" "The charitable reallocation last month. One of the programs you cut it helps families avoid separation due to housing instability. I need it reinstated." "Alexander, you're supposed to be learning." "I am learning. Alex's voice carried a desperation he'd never felt before. I'm learning that our decisions have faces, that our budget cuts destroy real families. There's a family right now, 2 little kids who are going into foster care tomorrow because we decided to save $40,000. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. This is about a girl. This is about doing what's right.
And the girl?
Alex closed his eyes. Her name is Ella. She's a social worker. She's the best person I've ever met, and I'm lying to her about everything. Have you told her who you are? How can I? She hates everything our family represents. She sees us as exactly what we are, people who make decisions about other people's lives without understanding the consequences. And now you understand the consequences? Yes. Alex's voice was barely a whisper. Grandfather, please, I'll do anything you ask, but please don't let those children pay for our callousness. Another long pause. Then I'll make the call. The funding will be restored within the hour. Thank you. Alexander, this doesn't change our agreement. You still have 4 months to prove yourself.
I know.
And you still haven't solved your bigger problem. Alex knew exactly what he meant. How do you build a relationship on authenticity when the foundation is a lie? Alex returned to the store to find Ella pacing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear. Are you sure, she was saying, the full amount and its permanent funding, not just a one-time? She paused, listening. I don't understand. Why would they change their minds so quickly? Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. Okay, yes, I'll call the Rodriguezes immediately. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, thank you so much. Ella hung up and turned to Alex with a smile that could have powered the entire city. You're not going to believe this. The housing program just got their funding back. All of it, plus additional money for emergency cases. That's incredible, Alex managed. The social services director said Blackwood Enterprises called personally to reinstate the program. Apparently someone high up in the company had a change of heart. Ella shook her head in amazement. I don't care what caused it. Maybe they got some bad publicity. Maybe it was a tax write-off, but the Rodriguez kids get to stay with their parents. Alex felt the weight of his deception like a physical pain. She was so happy, so relieved, and she had no idea that he was the reason the family had been in jeopardy in the first place. You should celebrate, he said. I should call the Rodriguezes. But first... Ella stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Thank you. I didn't do anything. You listened. You cared. That matters more than you know. She reached up and kissed his cheek, a gentle touch that sent electricity through his entire body. I'm going to go deliver the good news in person. Want to come with me? The offer was tempting, but Alex knew he couldn't handle meeting the family he'd unknowingly hurt, seeing their relief while carrying the knowledge of his own complicity. I should stay and mind the store. Rain check then? Definitely. After Ella left, Alex sat alone among the books, trying to figure out how to untangle the web he'd woven. He was falling in love with her, had been falling for weeks, but every conversation felt like another lie, every moment of connection built on false pretenses. His phone buzzed with a text from his grandfather. Impressive, but fixing one mistake doesn't erase the fundamental problem. You have 120 days remaining. Over the following month, Alex threw himself into his new life with a determination that surprised everyone, including himself. He worked extra shifts at the bookstore, volunteered at a local literacy program, and slowly began to understand what Ella meant about community and connection. He also began to understand the daily mathematics of survival that most people lived with. Counting dollars for groceries, walking instead of taking the subway to save money, making choices between necessities that he'd never had to consider. It was exhausting and frightening and somehow more real than anything he'd ever experienced. You're different, Sophie observed one afternoon as they unpacked a shipment of new releases. When you first started here, You move through the world like someone playing dress-up. Now you move like someone who belongs. Maybe I'm finally figuring out who I actually am, Alex said. And who is that? Alex considered the question as he shelved a copy of The Great Gatsby, a book he was finally reading for pleasure rather than literary analysis. Someone who wants to earn the good things in his life instead of inheriting them. That's a start. It was early December when Ella asked him out. They were closing the store together, a routine that had become comfortable over the weeks, when she turned to him with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Alex, would you like to have dinner with me? Not just grabbing sandwiches between customers, but actual dinner. Like a date. Alex's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. I'd love to, but Ella, there are things about me. We all have histories, she said gently. Whatever yours is, it brought you here to this moment. That's what matters to me. They went to a small Italian restaurant in her neighborhood, the kind of place where the owner knew regular customers by name and the wine list was written on a chalkboard. Alex found himself more nervous than he'd ever been in his life, including board presentations and merger negotiations. Tell me something real about you, Ella said over appetizers. Something you've never told anyone else. Alex took a sip of wine, buying time. I used to be terrified of being ordinary. Used to be? Now I think being ordinary might be the most extraordinary thing I could achieve. He met her eyes. What about you? I used to think that love was something that happened to other people. People who had stable childhoods and predictable lives. Ella traced the rim of her wineglass with her finger. I convinced myself that I was too damaged, too focused on my work, too afraid of losing people to risk letting anyone get close. What changed your mind? You did. The words hit Alex like a physical blow. She was falling in love with Alex Parker, the bookstore employee who volunteered with literacy programs and worried about grocery money. She had no idea that Alexander Blackwood existed, let alone that they were the same person. Ella. I know it's fast, she said quickly. I know we've only known each other for 2 months, but there's something about you that feels safe, real, like you're exactly who you appear to be. Alex felt like he was drowning. What if I told you that everything you think you know about me is a lie? Ella's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? Hypothetically, what if the person you're falling for was pretending to be someone else entirely? Are you married? She asked, her voice suddenly cautious. No. Running from the law? No. Then what could be so terrible that you think it would change how I feel about you? Alex wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to confess his real name, his inheritance, the test his grandfather had devised. But looking at her open, trusting face, he couldn't find the words. Never mind, he said finally. Hypothetical scenarios aren't worth ruining a perfect evening. But the weight of his deception had shifted something between them. For the rest of dinner, despite Ella's attempts to recapture their earlier intimacy, Alex felt like he was watching their relationship from the outside, seeing all the ways his lies were poisoning something beautiful. The reckoning came on a snowy evening in late January. Alex was working late in the bookstore, doing inventory, when the bell above the door chimed. He looked up to see his grandfather standing in the entrance, looking completely out of place among the cozy chaos of chapter and verse. "Hello, Alexander." Alex's blood turned to ice. "What are you doing here?" "Your 6 months are up next week. I thought it was time for a final evaluation." Harrison moved through the store with the careful attention of someone assessing real estate. "Charming place. I can see why you've been hiding here." "I haven't been hiding, I've been living." "Have you?" Harrison stopped in front of the poetry section, running his fingers along the spine of a worn copy of Langston Hughes. "Because from what I can tell, you've simply traded one performance for another. Instead of playing the wealthy heir, you're playing the working-class hero." "That's not—" The bell chimed again, and Ella walked in, stamping snow off her boots. She looked up and froze, taking in the expensive suit, the commanding presence, the obvious wealth that Harrison wore like armor. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing between them. "I didn't realize you had customers. I can come back." "No need," Harrison said smoothly. "I was just leaving, but first—" He extended his hand to Ella. "Harrison Blackwood. I'm Alexander's grandfather." Alex watched the color drain from Ella's face as the name registered. Blackwood. The same name she'd cursed over the Rodriguez family, the same company whose charitable decisions had nearly torn apart the family she'd fought to save. "Alexander?" she repeated slowly, looking at Alex with dawning understanding.
Ella.
"Alexander Blackwood." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're Alexander Blackwood." Harrison observed the exchange with clinical interest. "I take it you haven't been entirely honest with Miss Martinez about your identity, Alexander." "Please," Alex said desperately, "let me explain." But Ella was already backing toward the door, her face a mask of betrayal and disgust. "You lied to me about everything, your name, your background, your entire life. The important things were true." "Important?" Ella's voice cracked with fury. "You're the heir to the company that nearly destroyed the Rodriguez family. You signed off on cutting their funding. And then you sat there and watched me cry about it, watched me blame your heartless executives, while you knew the whole time that you were one of them." "I fixed it," Alex said weakly. "I made sure the funding was restored. After I told you how it was affecting real people, after you saw the consequences of your decisions up close." Ella shook her head. "Do you think that makes it better? That you only developed a conscience when the suffering had a face you recognized?" "That's not I was learning." "You were slumming." The words exploded out of her with years of accumulated rage. "You were playing poverty tourist, pretending to understand what it's like to struggle while you had a trust fund safety net the entire time." Harrison stepped forward. "Miss Martinez, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Ella said, her eyes never leaving Alex's face. "I understand perfectly. This was all some kind of experiment, wasn't it? Some rich boy's game to see if he could fool the naive social worker into falling for his act." "It wasn't an act," Alex said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. Everything between us. Everything between us was built on lies." Tears were streaming down Ella's face now. "I told you I could spot a fake from 3 blocks away. Turns out I was wrong." She turned and walked out into the snow, leaving Alex and his grandfather alone among the books. "Well," Harrison said after a long moment, "that could have gone better." Alex sank into the reading chair, burying his face in his hands. "I love her." "I believe you do." "She'll never forgive me." "Probably not." Harrison sat down across from him. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do? She's right. I lied about everything." "Did you? You worked here honestly. You learned to live on minimum wage. You volunteered with the literacy program. You made friends, built relationships, contributed to a community." Harrison leaned forward. "Those weren't lies, Alexander. Those were choices. But the foundation was rotten, yes, but foundations can be rebuilt." Harrison stood up, straightening his coat. "You have a choice to make, grandson. You can go back to the penthouse, inherit your billions, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. Or you can figure out how to earn the love of a woman who values authenticity above everything else. She'll never trust me again. Then you'll have to prove that the man she fell in love with is real, regardless of his name or bank account." Harrison headed toward the door, then paused. "Your 6 months are up, Alexander. But your real test is just beginning." Epilogue, 6 months later. The community center in East Brooklyn was bustling with activity on a warm Saturday morning in July. Children's laughter echoed from the playground. Teenagers worked on murals along the exterior walls, and families gathered for the weekly farmers market that had become a neighborhood institution. Alex. He'd legally changed his name, dropping the Alexander that had never felt like him anyway, stood behind a table of fresh produce, helping Mrs. Rodriguez select vegetables for the week. Her children, Sophia and Miguel, played nearby, their laughter a sound he'd learned to treasure. "How much for the tomatoes?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked in accented English. "For you, free," Alex replied, packing them carefully into her reusable bag. "Community garden surplus. We have more than we can use." "You sure?" "I'm sure." The community center was his project now. Not Alexander Blackwood's charity tax write-off, but Alex Parker's commitment to the neighborhood he'd learned to call home. He'd used his inheritance, but not the way his grandfather had expected. Instead of taking control of Blackwood Enterprises, he'd sold his shares and used the money to establish a foundation focused on community-driven solutions to poverty and housing instability. "Alex!" Sophia Rodriguez ran up to his table, her face bright with excitement. "Miss Ella is here!" Alex's heart stopped. He hadn't seen Ella since that night in the bookstore 6 months ago, though he'd heard through Sophie that she'd taken a job with a different organization, one that worked internationally on family reunification. He looked up to see her walking across the courtyard, her hair longer than he remembered, her face tanned from what he'd heard was work in refugee camps. She looked older, more serious, but still beautiful in that natural, unguarded way that had first captured his attention. "Hello, Alex," she said when she reached his table. "Ella, Sophie said you were overseas." "I was. Kenya mostly, working with families separated by conflict." She glanced around the bustling community center. "This is impressive. I heard you built it from the ground up." "I had help, a lot of help." Alex gestured to the volunteers, the families, the teenagers who'd painted the murals. "It turns out community organizing is harder than running board meetings." "But more rewarding?" "Much." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of their history hanging between them. "I also heard," Ella said carefully, "that Alexander Blackwood officially renounced his inheritance and dissolved the trust fund." "Alex Parker did that, actually. Alexander Blackwood was a mistake I needed to correct." "And the bookstore?" "I still work there on weekends. Sophie says I'm finally competent with the espresso machine." Despite herself, Ella smiled. "That's progress." "Ella, I know I have no right to ask this, but—" "I'm not here for an apology," she interrupted. "I've had 6 months to think about what happened, and I've realized something." Alex held his breath. "You lied about your name, your background, your family. Those were significant lies, and they hurt." Ella's voice was steady, but he could hear the old pain underneath. "But the person I fell in love with, the man who learned to make coffee, who listened to customers' stories, who cared about strangers' problems, that person was real." He is." "I know." Ella looked around the community center again, taking in the children playing, the families shopping, the sense of belonging that permeated everything. "Because that person is the one who built this place, who learned that charity isn't about writing checks, it's about showing up." "Does that mean—" Alex hardly dared to hope. "It means I'm tired of being angry. It means I've seen enough broken families to know that love is too rare and too precious to waste on pride." Ella stepped closer. "It means I'd like to try again, if you're willing to be completely honest this time." "Completely honest," Alex agreed, his heart hammering. "Starting with this, I never stopped loving you, not for one day in the past 6 months. And I never stopped missing you, even when I hated you." Then Alex kissed her, surrounded by the community they would build together.